Welcome to Story Chat Radio. We are book editors Carly Hayward and Jenny Chappell. Every month we watch a different movie with an eye for storytelling and novel writing.
We use our years of training and experience editing novels to break down each movie's storytelling elements to help you improve your novel in progress.
Warning, Jenny ruins everything.
Hey, you ruin things too.
So don't be surprised if there are spoilers.
On this episode, we're discussing the horror film A Quiet Place. Then we'll end with a critique of one lucky author's query. So Carly, what have you been up to this last month?
Oh man, this last month, January. January is always hard. I get a lot of contacts because people are ready to start up their book and the holidays are over and it's all very exciting. And then I decide to revamp how I schedule everything, and I'm like, this year I'm going to be a really good planner, and it doesn't go much further than a month in. But other than that, let's see. Oh, we had a Rev Pit 10 Queries is happening.
Right, so we've got our queries right now.
Yep.
The raffle was this past Friday, so we're reading those, and then next week we'll have our actual 10 queries posted. It's really cool because we have 20 editors participating this time, so there were a lot of winners.
It's crazy. We haven't had this many ever, I think, for a 10 queries.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever had this many, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
And then we also have a query connection.
Right.
10 query, or not 10 queries, but a query critique going on, which is very exciting. It's a cool new forum for authors to kind of go through their queries together while they're pitching, and I think it's great.
Yeah, it allows for a peer critique kind of situation. And I guess there used to be a forum similar to this that shut down. And so some of the authors who really loved that forum got together and created a new one. So they reached out to Carly and me and some of the other editors around Twitter. Some we know, and I think some maybe we didn't. So that's always fun to make some new editor friends too. And so we're each giving away a query critique, and you can still enter that until the 31st. So just a few days after this will come out, then people will still be able to enter. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that one.
Yeah, so I've been doing those as well. And I just did a couple of free webinars this past weekend. Nail your second draft. So it's kind of tips and tricks, best practices for after you finish your first draft and you let it rest for a little while, then how to get into your first revision so that hopefully you can have a more effective revision is the process for that. So that was a lot of fun. I had a really good turnout for that. And,
that sounds so fun.
Yeah, I really liked it. So I'm hoping to do something else again later in this year, but we've got these two query events right now, and then RevPit coming up soon, and we're just going to have a ton going on. My retreat in July, so I probably won't get to anything else like this till the fall at least.
I mean, you don't sound busy enough to me. I don't see why you can't do another one.
You sound like my assistant, Sandy. So this month we're talking about A Quiet Place.
Yes. So, all right, here comes the spoilers. Here's the whole breakdown of the movie. A Quiet Place is set in a near-future dystopia where the world has been overrun by some kind of creatures that almost look like giant spiders and have such an incredible sense of hearing that people can't even speak without risk of being attacked. The movie shows a family trying to survive this situation with young children. It actually just shows 3 days in the lives of this family. One early in this world, and then about a year and a half later when the mother is pregnant again. A lot of the scenes are set up showing how the family has survived all this time, how they keep some sense of normalcy, and how they are preparing for the birth of their next child. But it's all infused with this incredible tension over the fact that they can't make any sound whatsoever. The big climax occurs when the mom goes into labor and the family has to fight off the creatures who come during her labor. Because who can be quiet during that time?
She
They
manages to
have
be way quieter than I was, man.
I'm sure. They have to keep themselves safe as well as protect the newborn baby. So, Jenny, what did you think?
Oh, I loved it. So I've heard a lot about this movie. We have both been pretty open about the fact that horror movies are not really our thing.
Hmm.
It's funny because I don't mind reading horror, but for some reason, watching it really bothers me. I have kind of a thing where like being scared and being sad is like too overwhelming for me. I don't know.
Too many emotions?
It is. It's too many emotions. I can't handle it. And so normally, so there'll be like one horror movie every couple of years that I want to see, and it's almost always supernatural and historical. So like I really liked Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe in it, and so that's kind of my style of horror movie. So I did. My family went to see this while it was in the theaters. I did not go with them. So everybody I know though has seen it, and they've talked about how good it is, and so I was really excited to get to watch it with you, and yeah, I loved it. I had a few problems with it, as those who read our live tweet threads may have seen.
We had a lot of problems.
Yeah, but I think that a lot of that comes down to kind of that thing with horror movies. Like, if the characters always did exactly what we wanted them to, like, it wouldn't really be much of a movie, right? But I was surprised, honestly, that it wasn't as scary as I expected it to be. And instead, there was just, like, all this tension from the very beginning. The pacing of the movie was really quick. It's only about an hour and a half long. And so they managed to make each scene have a lot of conflict. So, like, just the premise, like, can you imagine having to be silent all the time, not even taking talking into account? Like, as I was like typing up my notes on this, I was going like, oh my gosh, just typing makes so much noise. Like my family's always like, what are you typing over there so furiously? And I'm like, what? Oh, was I didn't realize.
Yeah,
So
I even
everyone
sigh loudly.
I know, right? So everyone involved in creating this movie did such an amazing job with creating this tension, down to the music. Like, I remember in a college film class learning about how like the score is like supposed to heighten tension, and not having any music over the course of the most of the movie was really bizarre, and I feel like it did a really great job of heightening that tension. So it's just one example. So what else? What did you think about it?
I completely agree. I really, really liked it way more than I thought I would. And I know I was like super quiet and under wraps about it, but I mean, like you said, I really don't like scary movies, and like I'm always super scared about over them, and very clearly didn't want to watch this movie. I mean, I know I was really subtle. I don't think you picked up on the fact that I didn't want to watch this movie. But,
Yeah, so subtle.
I
Subtlety
was
is really your
so
forte.
I'm really good at being subtle.
You are, it's true.
Um,
In other words, not subtle at all.
no, no. I complained about it the whole time. It's fine. It was totally fine. Um, but it really didn't scare me very much. Like, it had tension and some jump scares, but it wasn't too bad. I think part of it was that it's just not what scares me. I really don't do well with like spooky ghosts. I still have nightmares from Sixth Sense, watching it like 20 years ago or however long ago it came out. But I also think it might have been that we were all watching it together and live tweeting, and I was so focused on tweeting out my reactions that I didn't process my reactions.
Yeah.
So, who knows?
Maybe that was good for this one though.
It was. It was really good. It was helpful. Anyway, I really liked the movie. There are definitely times where I got frustrated, like you said. Like, obviously, don't make this noise. Can't you see the monster is right there?
Right.
Which isn't really fair, but and I think you and I both actually ended up focusing a lot on how the dad doesn't trust his daughter throughout the film.
Yeah.
And I couldn't decide if it was sexism or ableism or the fact that he just never forgave her for a mistake she makes on that first day where she gives the youngest son a toy rocket that makes noise and then he ends up getting killed for it. Um, and I personally found that very distracting. It's not that the dad couldn't have complex feelings about his daughter, but like, why were were the two women wearing dresses in this post-apocalyptic future where you would think you would want clothes that you can run away in?
Right.
It just seemed weird to me because beyond that, the movie was so smart and well
Yes.
done and like just really, really good. And I felt like that was a little odd. But besides my one criticism,
Right.
I would say like the cinematography was gorgeous.
It definitely was.
If we hadn't been like live watching together, I would have paused it so many times because some of the shots were just beautiful and interesting. And the acting was amazing, especially the daughter. I was obsessed with her.
Totally. Yeah.
Um, I want her to be in like every movie ever. She was so good.
Right. I just want to see like a spin-off of her going around the world, like
Yeah,
kicking giant spider butt.
totally. Although I do feel like you and I do this with every movie. We're like,
We do.
hey, this one side female character was amazing. Can we just watch them? We have a
I'm
little bit of a type,
I'm
but
seeing this trend. Yes.
yeah, I think it's been in all of these movies we have said this. Yep. Yeah, it's all of them. Anyway, um, but I could go on and on about what I liked and what I didn't. So let's focus on the point of the podcast. So, Jenny, what did it do well that writers can use in their writing?
So I think for me, what really stood out most to me about this movie was the show not tell. And it's kind of an extreme case, and I think maybe that's why it really stood out to me. That because of just this incredibly small amount of dialogue, and a lot of the dialogue is delivered through sign language, but
Mm-hmm.
even in that, there's a very small amount of it.
Yep.
For example, um, we don't know these characters' names.
Yeah,
Is
I was
that
gonna
something you
ask.
picked up on? Like, they
eh,
never said their names, did they?
No, they didn't. But I got worried that I missed it
Right,
and I didn't
right,
do any follow-up research to figure it out. But I was like, I don't know, maybe it was at a scary moment and I like turned my head away and
right,
they signed it and I missed it.
right. So, like, there's just this it's such a small amount of dialogue, and the dialogue that is in it, whether it's spoken aloud or through sign language, is so tight that it has to be. It's just like the bare
Mm-hmm.
minimum of what must be spoken. So telling just simply isn't an option in this movie. So it means that the director and the writers had to find really interesting ways to show the necessary information, and it really stuck out to me. And I think what's key here for novelists is that the viewer is able to learn about the characters through their actions and what the camera focuses on. So, like, just in that very first scene. So, in the very first scene there, the family is in this abandoned store, and the mom is looking through various bottles of medicine trying to find medication for their son who's sick. And so in the very first scene we see the store has nearly empty shelves, and there's like stuff all over the floor. It seems right away that this could be the post-apocalyptic setting before we even know anything about any of the characters or
And
anything.
far into the setting too, because
Yes.
everything's stolen already.
And everything's deserted. We don't see any other people around except for just this family. But we do still get to see that they're still a pretty happy family, despite whatever's happened. We don't know yet at that point what's happened. But we get to see something about each character through their actions. So the mom searching for the medication tells us that she is a caring mother, and also hints at a possible background in the medical field. The kids' interactions with each other tell us that they're managing to have some sense of normalcy, even with the drastic changes in their environment. We see that they're hoarding supplies. All these little details build up the world and show us something about the characters without a single word of exposition. So for authors, this is really important because it speaks to how you can show world building and show characterization simultaneously, as the character moves through the world, as opposed to sort of the dreaded info dumps that just explain everything, kind of handing all the information to the reader on a platter. It's a problem I see a lot in my editing, and I bet you do too. Just
Oh, yeah.
authors kind of over-explaining things, whether it's character backstory, the world, giving us too much description, whatever. Things that are better shown through the character interacting with the world. So writers, remember that your narrator, who's usually the main character, is the vehicle for your reader to see the world. Which details you choose to place in front of the camera, quote unquote, or the focus of the narration, tells the reader a lot about what you, as the author, want them to know. So make sure you're picking details that have the most impact in terms of showing your characters, showing your world building, those kinds of things.
So I know it's super helpful in a podcast, but I have been nodding vigorously this whole time. It's just everything you said is perfectly on point. One of my biggest pet peeves, which is a very small thing, but it's a long description of the setup up front. Before we even get to the scene. I don't like it when a character walks into a room and then describes everything they see. We need to learn about the environment through interactions with it. So have your characters move through the space to show us what is important, what is interesting, what builds the world and sets the scene. Teach us about the world and your characters by what is important enough to them to interact with. Like you said, the youngest son is most interested in being a kid, so he's interested in a toy rocket. Of course he is. He's a kid.
Right.
He just wants to have some fun in his life, and this world sucks. And the daughter
really sucks.
It totally sucks. I don't want to live in this world. And the daughter handing it to him after the father takes it away really shows that she's trying to be there for her brother. She is also a caretaker.
Right.
In a world where you need to care for each other to survive, it's really telling to see which ones do it and which ones step up.
Right.
It's not only the parents that are taking on that role, and we get to see how that apocalyptic environment has shaped them and changed them. She probably wouldn't have done that in a normal setting. She probably would have been annoyed with her brother or something.
Right. It's very possible. I think what's interesting, too, you saying that she's also a caretaker. For me, something that I always look at, I think for me, it's almost kind of a subconscious thing, is looking at the non-romantic relationships in any story. And I mean, I love a good romance for sure, but
totally.
Friendships and family relationships, I think there's a lot to mine there that stories don't always go into deep enough. And because this one is about a family, I think they did a really good job of showing how all of the characters take care of each other, you know? And I think it's interesting that even when they have conflicts, it's still over, you know, who the different ways they're trying to take care of each other, as opposed to somebody being like, no, I just want to, strike off on my own, and I don't care if the giant alien spider people eat people or not.
Yeah. They fight over who gets to help the most,
Right.
basically. Yeah, it's really a cool way to see how they're shaped and how they respond to this world and like what that means to their relationships with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like you said, with how they each interact with the store, but we also see again how what we're saying is like they interact with each other, and we can see the tension in their whole bodies when there's even a slight sound.
Oh my gosh, that was the hardest part of watching the movie for me.
Oh yeah.
Like every little sound, I was just going like, "Oh no, what's gonna happen?"
I felt so much tension when there was sound. A, because there's not much sound, and B, because like they physically react to it.
Yes. Yes.
We don't just hear, "Oh no, sound." We
Mm-hmm.
see a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see how they respond to that tension, who they look to first, what they look for, how they signal each other.
Mm-hmm.
Without talking, we get to see like, oh, the parents immediately glance at each other and like share a knowing look,
Mm-hmm.
and they're prepared for this, but they rely on each other, and all of these relationships are fleshed out by a single look at a
Mm-hmm.
crucial moment. And it's just really interesting. I mean, all the actions seem pretty obvious when you think about it, but they tell us just so much more than dialogue would have in those moments.
Right. Yeah, I
Um,
totally agree.
and I think it's a good way to like approach your book. If you can take anything out of the dialogue or the inner thoughts and put it into movement or actions, it will speak volumes. Show us how they're feeling and what is important to them and what interests them by how they interact with the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's just way more interesting to put pieces of a character together that way instead of having an author tell the reader those things. I don't want to know, oh, they like lollipops. I want to see them sucking on a lollipop constantly throughout the
Right.
book. Just show us that the kid is sick by having the mom pick up the bottle of medicine instead of saying, poor Johnny has been sick for weeks, you know? Just those kinds of things I think are really great ways to immerse a reader into your manuscript.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. There was one scene that really stood out to me, and it's the exchange where the dad and the daughter are outside the farmhouse, and he tries to give her her hearing aid, and she refuses to take it. And in that scene, I felt like there was a lot of history there. We get a lot of information about these two characters through this I mean, it's a pretty brief interaction, I think, in the scheme of the whole movie. And it's subtle. It's not like there's a lot of action in it. But we pick up on a lot about them. So, like, my first reaction was that the daughter is very much a teenager. Like,
Oh, yes.
despite there being this world that they are, you know, having to try to survive in a very visceral way, not in the way that a lot of people in America survive right now, but in a very visceral way they are surviving. Teenagers are still teenagers. Hormones are still hormones, you know? And so she wanted to do things on her own. She's frustrated that her father won't let her do that. But I also got the sense that she's sort of given up hope, whereas the dad seems to have taken a more optimistic view. Like, if we can just keep going, we can survive. But she seemed to feel like she just, you know, nothing was worth it anymore. And it really spoke to me about how kids and parents often take different views on the same aspects of their personalities. And it sort of links back to what you were saying about like the mom and the daughter both being kind of caretakers. like, I think that the dad, I thought of him as being like a fixer, you know, like he wants to fix people's problems. He wants to take a proactive approach to those problems. And I think the daughter is like that too. And their conflict between the two of them in this scene, I think, comes from them not being able to fix everything for themselves or for each other. And it's really frustrating for both of them. So I got all of this out of a scene that was like a minute long with no dialogue, just the characters interacting with each other.
I think you're definitely right, because towards the end, when she finally goes in the basement and sees all the hearing aids that he's been trying to fix for her, and like that moment is very quick, and we just see like her facial reaction to it, but it's very heartbreaking. Like, she realizes how much he's been trying to fix the world and how optimistic he's been, and we see it affect her and how she might move forward from there.
Right. And I think what it really speaks to is, how do we show kind of what's going on inside of a character? And writers, who are novelists, have some different tools at their disposal that like a screenwriter may not have, because we do have the opportunity to name emotions, to show what's going on inside of our main characters' heads and inside of their bodies, not just their external expressions. But again, circling back to what you said about the sound, that the characters all have like these big reactions every time that there's a sound, and that makes the viewer have a big reaction, right? It's the same thing in writing. So when you show a character's reaction, that gives your reader something to connect with. So showing character reactions is super important, and the more important the character is, the more reaction we need to see from them. It's kind of like the thing people say about how you should believe people's actions more than their words, because it's easy to lie, but it's hard to change behavior. People, characters show who they are in the way they react to things. So like in this movie, in that very first scene, when the dad sees that the son has the little rocket ship, and that it is electronic and it has batteries in it, and he, like, not only does he sort of take this protective stance, almost, it reminds me of kind of that classic thing about your mom shooting her arm out to stop you from moving, even though you're both wearing your seatbelts in the car. So he kind of takes this protective stance, but at the same time, he goes for the toy immediately. Like, he's going to fix that problem right away. And so we see that reaction in him, and it tells us this about his character. So when we see characters reacting in ways that feel true to our own experiences, either that we have felt that reaction before, we've seen that reaction in other people, it fleshes the character out more and makes them feel real. It's how you show not only a character's emotions, but also their growth and change over the course of a story. That's all in their reactions. So to that end, I highly recommend literally every author I talk to, that they buy a copy of The Emotion Thesaurus. It's the best tool out there that I've seen for showing character reactions, because it addresses thoughts, emotions, and then visceral body responses. So like internal stuff, like your heart or like tightness or whatever, and also body language. So facial expressions, gestures, proximity, moving closer to someone, further away, that kind of thing. The Emotion Thesaurus really encompasses all of that and can really help writers learn how to show and not tell when it comes to those reactions.
Oh my God. I love the Emotion Thesaurus. I had trouble not interrupting you there because it's so good. I agree. I think it's the book I most recommend to authors. It's just so useful as a reference, and it just can really push you into different places. I think it's great. And I couldn't agree more about reacting. I find a lot of characters move through the world in an isolated way. They kind of barrel through without acknowledgement or reaction to the world or characters around them. But it's not interesting and it's not fun to read.
Mm-hmm.
Real three-dimensional characters spend the entire book reacting, always. That is how they should be portrayed. They should react to the world, the plot, the action, the obstacle, the people. And that reaction should be on both a macro and a micro level.
Mm-hmm.
All of life is about reactions, and that's what your book should be too. Showing us reactions through like small facial expressions, nervous fidgeting, heart thumping, like you said. It's all a really powerful way to make our reader connect with the character.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I just read the words heart pounded, it makes me very aware of my own heartbeat. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing a good job, it will make my heartbeat pound as well.
Mm-hmm.
Words are really powerful when you use them in the right way. And pulling your readers along on your journey by showing them the story, not by reading them a play, is really what gets them engrossed.
Mm-hmm.
And by focusing more on showing details through interactions and reactions, it'll also make your dialogue more powerful when you get around to it.
Right.
I think that's something we really see in this movie. There's so little dialogue that when it's there, it's crazy powerful. If you put everything into your dialogue, those big moments lose a lot of their power and they get lost.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make your dialogue more powerful by making it more intentional and sparse. I think I read somewhere that the actress that played the daughter came up with like a very important dialogue change. So towards the end, more spoilers, but whatever, this whole thing is spoilers. The father sacrifices himself so that his kids can get away. Again, trying to fix the situation, but
Right.
obviously he needed to. So he signs a line to the daughter right before he does it. And originally it was just going to be, I love you. But she suggested he change it to, I have always loved you.
Mm-hmm.
And something so tiny and small like that can mean so much more because we've seen and felt the struggle that she has had with her dad. She's become convinced that he doesn't believe in her and that he doesn't forgive her or care about her. And with this one line, he proves otherwise. I mean, why he didn't say it earlier kind of pisses me off, but whatever. This is better
It probably
tension.
goes back. It's true. It probably goes back to their whole like sexism dynamic that we won't
Right.
get into on this episode.
No, it's fine. It's totally fine. And I mean, it's better storytelling if he waits till his dying moment to express his love to his daughter, whatever. Anyway, the story is so bereft of dialogue that when it is used, you can see how powerful it can be.
Mm-hmm.
But you only get that power by showing more of your story outside of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
We just connect so much with the characters' reactions because we've been showed them. We've learned and connected with them through their actions. That when they do speak, we can be blown away.
Right.
So basically, all I'm saying is take as much out of your dialogue as you can. Show us through interactions and reactions. We can learn so much more about the world and the characters that way. And it's partially kind of similar to what you said, because we as readers will fill in the blanks with our own experiences. Whereas if you tell us something that happened, we see it as happening to you. But if you show us that tension and that nervousness, we apply our own history of tension and nervousness to that character, and then we forge this really intense connection with them because we feel that we've been through similar things and we've come along on their journey. And it's hard to forge that connection when you're being told everything. showing lets us feel along with the characters and immerses us in this world, whereas telling is like listening to a fairy tale. But just a side note, you do need to tell sometimes. It can't be all showing. It would be a very dense and boring and long book.
It would be.
Sometimes telling's important. You just have to
Right.
know when to tell.
It's true. So sometimes, I think most of the authors that I've worked with, if they have a problem with show and tell, it's normally that they tell too much and don't show enough.
Right.
But sometimes I have worked with authors who have the opposite problem, where
Yep.
they show everything and don't tell
Exactly.
anything. And so what I will sometimes tell those authors is to think of telling as being like the skeleton or like the girders of a skyscraper, that you're building this thing and you want to use the telling as kind of the inner structure that gives it its shape and form, and then you kind of add all of the pretty bits on top of that through showing. So
Yeah. You got to show the really important moments and usually tell the things that are less important and just need to get you from A to B.
right, right. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying in the beginning about thinking about what details that you're giving the reader, what you're describing needs to be the things that need to have more impact. The things that you are kind of skimming over are the things that it might be important information that they need to have in order to have an understanding, but it's not where you really want their focus to be.
Exactly. I think this episode has a good amount of crossover actually with our first episode about world building and the details that are important to show because they build a connection versus the details that we can skim over because they're either obvious or unimportant.
Right.
All right. I think we've gone pretty deep into this show versus tell.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah, I think it's time for our query critique.
All right. Yay.
So this week we have a query from a YA fantasy about a girl that must face down monsters while battling her PTSD. It is chock full of internal and external tension right from the get-go. What did you think?
So I could definitely see the comp to A Quiet Place,
Definitely.
like right out of the gate. It seems like the world is similar, and that there are monsters that hunt people. I felt like I wasn't terribly clear on what the external plot is, like what happens in the story. There's a lot of setup and a lot of world building and a lot of talk about the character, but it feels like there's not a lot of details about what actually happens in the story. And some of those details that are there seem like they might not need to be in the query. So I just suggest focusing more on the conflict and stakes of the plot. And then in terms of details, ask yourself, what does the reader really need to know in order to understand the main character, the main plot, and the stakes?
I definitely agree. I think I view it like very slightly differently, but I'm pretty sure we're on the same page. I think they did focus on the conflict and stakes, but they focused on the internal conflict and stakes. We learn about the main character's PTSD and the struggle she feels with it in a world that dismisses it. However, there are teases of the bigger picture and the plot that just aren't here. We need to see the external forces at play and why they are important, which is what I think you felt was missing. I loved the first paragraph because it used a lot of gripping words with like ravenous and petrify and hounding, and it hinted at bigger stuff. But then the rest of the query doesn't pay out on that bigger stuff. We don't really get to learn what is going on in this world. Like you said, it was a lot of world building and a lot of internal struggle. I wanted to know what happened with her father and how the PTSD gets in the way of the bigger plot. I think we were missing that connection of she has PTSD, but here's how it affects big plot device. instead of here's how the world reacts to her PTSD. We needed to not just see how it affects her internally, but externally.
Right.
Other than that, I thought it was definitely on the right track. I actually really enjoyed, especially the first paragraph. I thought it was very good.
Right. I think it's a good premise.
Yeah.
And that maybe the query just still needs some tweaking.
Agreed.
Well,
So
that brings us to the end of this episode.
it does. On our next podcast, we will be discussing the coming-of-age comedy Booksmart. We will also have another query or blurb critique. If you want your query featured on the podcast, you can find details about how to do that on our Twitter page.
You can find our podcast on our website, storychatradio.com, or you can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or many other streaming services. While you're there, please leave us a rating. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at StoryChatRadio.
Thanks for joining in our nonsense.
Oh, and read and try to analyze, like use what Carly has just said about the format of a query and analyze these queries, both the successful and unsuccessful queries, and break them down into those parts. And once you can kind of start to see that format and how it works and doesn't work, then you can write a more successful query for your own story.
Exactly. All very great advice. So I think we've come to the end of this episode. And on our next podcast, we will be discussing the movie that brought us together and keeps our friendship going through the darkest of times. We should probably watch it after this episode because we got in a mini fight.
We probably should.
The one, the only, The Princess Bride.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Like, I can't even tell you.
Time.
I'm so excited.
I can't wait.
I used to have every word of this movie memorized, but I have never
same.
one time watched it with the idea of like breaking it down into storytelling elements. And I tell writers this all the time, that like they should read their favorite books and take notes about what works and what doesn't work. So I feel like I'm having to eat my words a little bit here. And
It's time to do it.
it's time to do it. I'm very excited. Mostly about the gifts.
feel like
the gifts.
I was just going to say, I feel like our watch party is just going to be us sending gifts and quoting lines.
Of course it is.
What else would it be? Anyway, we will also have another query or blurb critique. So if you want your query featured on the podcast, you can find details about how to do that on our Twitter page.
You can find our podcast on our website, storychatradio.com, or you can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or many other streaming services. While you're there, please leave us a rating. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at StoryChatRadio.
Thanks for joining in our nonsense.